Gentlemen, girls and boys, and assembled company, including Louis, Babasi, David Heathfield, and Ali in Marrakesh. I am sitting in Whittam in Essex now rather than in wonderful Marrakesh. It's a little cooler than it was there. But tonight we have from a hotter part of the world, we have from New Mexico, which I hope they're not having the same storms that Texas has had. We have the amazing, the wonderful, the fantastic Bob Kanegis. Take it away, Bob.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, everybody that I can see. And those of you who I can't see, I'm sitting here in my office in Corrales, New Mexico. What we've got happening here are some really bad wildfires up north. So that's on everybody's mind. So last night, as I was going to bed, I was trying to think about what stories I might tell today. And as usual, stories came to me almost at the last minute. This morning, I took a walk down to the river. I live just about a mile from the Rio Grande River. So I was walking along the river on my usual morning walk, and there were a couple of mallard ducks floating around in what we call the clear ditch, which is an irrigation system that we have here in Corrales. And I thought, okay, I know what story I'm going to tell, at least the first one. Now, this story, a version of it goes all the way back thousands of years to India, but it came across the Atlantic, and it was told down south, and it's called Teensy Tiny Duck. Now, my favorite part about this story is simply just saying the name of it. It's just, I just love the way it sounds when it comes out of my mouth. Teensy Tiny Duck. So even though I probably won't be able to hear you, could you all try saying Teensy Tiny Duck? Yes, that worked even with mute. I could hear you. So once upon a time, there was a teensy tiny duck, and teensy tiny duck was waddling like he did every morning down by the river. But this wasn't just any morning, because on this morning, teensy tiny duck saw something glittering in the short grasses by the edge of the river. And when teensy tiny duck got closer, what did he see? A little bag, a little leather bag tied up like a purse. When he opened it up, it was filled with gold, more gold than you could possibly imagine. A duck's fortune in gold, a king's ransom in gold, and Teensy Tiny's duck heart expanded with joy. But only for a brief moment, because walking down by the river on his morning walk was a greedy, grabby man, a greedy, grabby old man. And when he heard Teensy Tiny Duck saying, "Ooh, I've got some pretty money. I found some pretty money," that greedy, grabby man didn't wait a second. He knew just what to do. He grabbed that bag of gold out of Teensy Tiny Duck's bill, and down the river he wobbled. And he could wobble, even though he was old, just fast enough to keep ahead of Teensy Tiny Duck. And there he was, Teensy Tiny Duck, rich one moment and the victim of highway robbery the next. He started to cry and to wail and to bemoan his fate, when suddenly his friend, Brer Rabbit, came along. And Brer Rabbit said, "What's the matter, Teensy Tiny Duck? You look lower than a centipede with fallen arches. What's happened to you?" And Teensy Tiny Duck tried to I was, and I found, hey, Teensy Tiny Duck, use words. Take a couple of deep breaths. Everything's going to be okay. So Teensy Tiny Duck took a couple of deep breaths. He composed himself, and he told Brer Rabbit the story of finding the pretty money and the greedy, grabby man. Brer Rabbit just looked at him and said, "You don't have a thing to worry about, because you've got magic powers. You've got superpowers." I do? Asked Teensy Tiny Duck. What superpowers? Well, you've got a magic tummy. I do? Nobody ever told you you had a magic? I do? Why, all you have to do is open your bill wide and you can swallow anything, no matter how big it is. And I think if you think for just a moment or two, you'll figure out how to use your magic tummy. Bye now. So that left Teensy Tiny Duck by the edge of the river, wondering how he was going to use that magic tummy. But the one thing that he knew, even though he was teensy tiny and that greedy, grabby man was a lot bigger than him, he was going to get that purty money back. Down the path he went, following the tracks. Oh, the greedy, grabby man had a cane, and it was just, he was leaning on it so heavy, he was making cane marks in the mud, and he could follow greedy, grabby man down the river path and down the path, Teensy Tiny Duck. And he started to make up a song as he went along. He said, "Give me back my pretty money before I use my magic tummy." And that's what he was singing when he came upon one of his friends. It was Fox. Now, you know, foxes can be ducks' friends. They're not always ducks' friends, but everybody knew Teensy Tiny Duck. Oh, he had friends. And Fox was one of them. Fox said, "What's that strange song you're singing about a magic tummy?" And Teensy Tiny was still pretty upset. He tried to tell the story, but use words, said Fox. Use words. Take a couple of deep breaths. What happened? Teensy Tiny Duck told the story of the greedy, grabby man. Fox said, "I'm not quite sure how I can help, but I'd sure like to help." Teensy Tiny Duck opened his bill and said, "Then jump down my throat into my magic tummy and come along with me." And that's just what Fox did. Teensy Tiny Duck opened up his bill, and down the gullet went Fox, sitting comfortably down at the bottom of Teensy Tiny Duck's magic tummy. Hey, just for a moment to make sure that you're all still with me, could you all say Teensy Tiny Duck with expression one more time? Teensy Tiny Duck. Now, Teensy Tiny Duck kept going down. Now he was past the river. He was down on the road that was going into town, waddling along, singing his song, "Give me back my pretty money before I use my magic tummy." And he saw another one of his friends, and that was Mr. Wolf, Brer Wolf. And Wolf heard that song, and Wolf was curious about it too. And this time, Teensy Tiny Duck wasn't crying anymore. He knew just what to say. And he told the story of the greedy, grabby man. Wolf wanted to help too. "Come down into my magic tummy," said Teensy Tiny Duck. He opened up his bill, and down the gullet went Wolf. And Wolf and Fox were sitting comfortably down there in Teensy Tiny Duck's magic tummy when Teensy Tiny Duck just kept on going down the road, and leaning up against the barn was Uncle Ladder. And Uncle Ladder, now if you have to ask yourself how it is that ladders can talk, you probably shouldn't even be listening to stories anyway. But because you're here, I think you know that ladders can talk. And this was Uncle Ladder. And Uncle Ladder heard that song, "Give me back my pretty money," and he wanted to know how his nephew Teensy Tiny Duck was getting along. And Teensy Tiny Duck told the whole story, opened his mouth, and you know that Grandfather Ladder wanted to help too. So Grandfather Ladder kind of folded himself up the way ladders can, if you really think about it. And he went down Teensy Tiny Duck's gullet. Down there he was with, who's down there? That's right, Fox and Wolf. Okay, good listening, everybody. So now we know who's down there now. And down the road, Teensy Tiny Duck came until he came to, one of his best friends and a mentor at that. He came to Grandfather River. The river had kind of wound around in an oxbow and come back, and it was crossing the road that Teensy Tiny Duck was going down right there over a bridge. And Grandfather River heard, "Give me back my pretty money before I use my magic tummy." He inquired about where that song came from. Teensy Tiny Duck told the story. He was getting really good at telling that story. He told it already 3 times or 4 times. And he told it to Grandfather River. And Grandfather River said, "I'd sure like to help. I'm not quite sure how I can help, but I want to help. Come on down into my magic tummy," said Teensy Tiny Duck. He opened up his bill, and Grandfather River just kind of made himself comfortable down at the bottom of Teensy Tiny Duck's belly. And when I try and visualize what might have been happening, I think maybe Wolf and Fox had to do like a little fox and wolf paddling or dog paddling in there to kind of stay afloat, or they were treading water, but they were doing just fine. Now, Teensy Tiny Duck was getting close to the greedy, grabby man's home, and he could tell. He could actually see the smokestack, chimney stack, not too far in the distance. But before he arrived at the door, he met a few more friends of his. In fact, he met a few more 1,000 friends of his, because he passed a beehive, a big old honeybee hive that was in a wild honeybee tree. Have you ever seen them? We got one right down here by the river. Well, Queen Bee, who was one of his very best friends, was singing her song, and all the drones were singing their buzzing song. And there's a lot of music in the air, but the one song you couldn't miss was "Give Me Back My Pretty Money Before I Use My Magic Tummy." Queen Bee wanted to know about that song, and Teensy Tiny Duck told the story again, and Queen Bee said, "We'd like to help. Well, come on down into my magic tummy," said Teensy Tiny Duck. And now the whole company was assembled down in Teensy Tiny's tummy for what was going to happen next. Well, Teensy Tiny Duck waddled right up to the big old oak door there that the greedy, grabby man lived behind. And he knocked on that door. The door opened up. Teensy Tiny Duck looked up, and the greedy, grabby man looked down. And Teensy Tiny Duck looked up and said, "Give me back my pretty money before I use my magic tummy." And the greedy, grabby man just looked at this little duck there at his doorstep and said, "I will not give you back one gold coin of that pretty money. It's mine now. And I know just what to do with a Teensy Tiny Duck. I'm going to throw you in the chicken coop, and I got a rooster there who's the meanest rooster in this town, and he's going to scratch you and bite you and tear you. And in the morning, you're not going to be a Teensy Tiny Duck." This is a hard thing to say, but you're going to be a dead duck. And that's just what that greedy, grabby man did. He picked up Teensy Tiny Duck by the legs, and he just about threw him in the chicken coop. And there he was, the meanest looking rooster with razor sharp talons. Rooster took one look at Teensy Tiny Duck, and he started coming right for him. But Teensy Tiny Duck had friends. And he called out, "Magic Tummy, send out the fox." And you know that foxes love to eat chickens. And the next morning, Teensy Tiny Duck was not a dead duck. There was a bunch of dead chickens and a dead rooster. And when the greedy, grabby man came out to see what had happened, Teensy Tiny Duck was alive and well. Now, this was a line for everybody, okay? So I'm going to watch you. I'm going to watch you and hear you say, "Teensy Tiny Duck was with feeling alive and well." Louis, can you say alive and well? Alive and well. Ooh, that made the greedy, grabby man really, really angry. He said, "Well, you got me this time, but you're not going to get me today. I know how to get rid of a miserable Teensy Tiny. Give me back my magic Give me back my pretty money before I use my magic tummy. Not so fast. I'm going to throw you in the barn. I got a big old stallion in there. He's going to stomp you and whomp you and kick you. And in the morning, you're not going to be a teensy tiny duck. You're going to be a what? A dead duck. He took teensy tiny duck up by the legs. He opened the barn door. He threw him in with that big stallion, and that stallion looked at teensy tiny duck. Oh, he had cold, dark eyes, and there was steam coming out of his nostrils, and he knew just what he was going to do with teensy tiny duck. But you remember what we're going to say now, right? Teensy tiny duck had friends. Magic Tummy, send out the wolf. Oh, well, the wolf had meaner, fiercer eyes than that stallion, and he had fangs and big teeth, and the stallion knew exactly what he was going to use them for, and so the stallion didn't waste a minute. He used those big hind legs. He knocked down the barn door, and he was off at a gallop. No one ever saw that stallion again. In the morning, Greedy Grabby Man came out, but he did not find a dead duck. His horse was missing, and everybody, Teensy Tiny Duck was alive and well. Oh, well, now let's see what happens next. Oh, I'll throw you down the well. Ducks can't fly up that high from a well. I don't know how deep that well was, but we know that the Greedy Grabby Man thought that was going to be the end of Teensy Tiny Duck. He picked up Teensy Tiny Duck by the head and the throat this time, and down he dropped him. Down, 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 until plunk, there was Teensy Tiny Duck. Now he could swim down in that small little circular piece of water, but he couldn't fly up. But Teensy Tiny Duck had friends. Oh, he had friends. Magic Tummy, send out Uncle Ladder. And Uncle Ladder came up out of his gullet, unfolded himself, leaned himself up against the edge of the well. And I wish I could do this, but I'm not quite sure. Maybe you could kind of get out of your seats a little bit and try and climb up like a waddling duck up a ladder. Here we go. Teensy Tiny Duck crawled up at the top of the well just as Greedy Grabby Man looked down to see what would happen. And there was Teensy Tiny Duck. He wasn't a duck, wasn't a dead duck. He was alive and well. Oh, what am I going to do with you? I got to get rid of you somehow. Give me back my pretty money before I use my magic tummy again. No, you're not going to use your magic tummy again. I know how to get rid of you this time. Well, he put on a pot of water on the stove. He turned on the heat. That water was boiling. No, that's not what he was doing. No, he was going to barbecue. That's right. He was going to barbecue Teensy Tiny Duck. I was going to boil him, but I think we're going to barbecue him. All right. So we got the barbecue pit all set up, and he was just ready to skewer Teensy Tiny Duck and put him on there. But who's left? Who's still down there in the magic tummy? Oh yeah, let's see. Grandfather River. Grandfather River came out the gullet and put that fire out. And now that Greedy Grabby Man didn't have much hair, but what little hair he had, he was pulling it out. Give me back my magic money before I use my magic tummy. I want my money now. And Greedy Grabby Man said, well, that's it. Now, this is the hardest part of the story to tell. And I hope you don't get too upset hearing this. But Greedy Grabby Man grabbed Teensy Tiny Duck by the throat and he said, I'm just going to wring your neck and be done with you. And it looked like that was going to be the end curtains for Teachy Tiny Duck, because the greedy grabby man started to twist. Teachy Tiny Duck was having a hard time getting any air, and he only had a couple of breaths left, but he used one of those last breaths, and Teachy Tiny Duck had friends. Thousands of them. Who's left down there in the magic tummy? Oh, and out came the bees. And I forgot to tell you, but it was still early in the morning, and greedy grabby man was wearing his pajamas, and they were loose. And Queen Bee went right down the back of his pants, followed by all her worker bees, and they began to sting the greedy grabby man, you know where. And if you've ever been stung, you know where. You will be ready to do anything to stop the bees. Call off the bees and I'll give you back your pretty money, said the greedy grabby man. Bees, you can go home now, said Teachy Tiny Duck. And the bees flew off, and the greedy grabby man went into his house, and he took that purse of pretty money and he handed it back to Teachy Tiny Duck. Now, I think Teachy Tiny Duck made greedy grabby man empty all his other pockets too, but the story didn't say that. But I think that he took a tip for all his troubles. And after that, on the way home, Grandfather River went back and lay down in his bed and kept on flowing. Uncle Ladder took his place back up by the barn, and the wolf went off to take care of her pups, and the fox went home to his den and maybe wondered if he could get some more chickens. And Teachy Tiny Duck waddled on home. And you're just going to have to imagine, because I don't really know what Teachy Tiny Duck did with all that gold, but you can be sure that he was really happy that he had a magic tummy and got his pretty money back. That's the story of Teachy Tiny Duck. One more time, everybody. Teachy Tiny Duck. Thanks. So some of you may have recognized a motif from that story, from other stories that you may have heard from perhaps from England. I think there's a version, might be called Drake's Tale, that's similar, and it goes back all the way, as I said, to ancient India. I guess there's been greedy, grabby men and brave animals since the beginning, since a long time ago.
Thanks, Bob. That was amazing. Woo!
Thank you.
I
Fantastic.
second that, David.
And
I third it.
Baba C, have you ever seen that story in Joel Chandler Harris's Uncle Remus stories? That's where
I've heard versions of the story, but what I really like about yours is how elaborate and detailed and fascinating it was. It is. So, with your permission, I'm going to adapt that story.
That's what they're here for.
Hey, that was great. Teachy
All right,
Tiny Duck.
Teachy Tiny Duck. Okay, I've actually got another story that also goes back thousands of years. You can find a version of this in Indian folk tales, and then you can find all kinds of versions, and I bet you every teller here knows a version of it. But my friend Joe Hayes, who's my colleague and a very good friend, Joe Hayes here, took that story from India, and he tried to imagine what it might be like put in modern times. So with his permission, I've adapted his adaptation. And this story might have happened right here where I live, because I'm looking out the windows at the Sandia Mountains, and which rise almost 2 miles from sea level. They're 11,000 feet. And the Rio Grande River, which is not so large anymore now that the dams keep it from flooding, is flowing by, as I mentioned. And we've been having some strong, strong winds, and all these characters will appear in this story. But if you've got earth, water, creeks, wind, this story might have happened right where you live too. Now, just a little preface. If you were looking for me, if you were looking for Robbie when he was 6 years old, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, you'd probably find him up in a tree, a climbing tree, or down by the stream, making little dams and clearing them up and cleaning up the woods. And I guess you would call me kind of a nature child. Now, I'm still climbing trees, by the way. I climbed a redwood tree when I was in California not too long ago. Not bad for a 70-plus old guy, but so I was a nature kid, and I'm still a nature kid. Now I'm a nature grandpa. Well, there were a couple of nature kids, a brother and their sister, a long time ago, and they loved the outdoors. They loved nature. They loved all of it, but the brother was particularly interested in birds, and he didn't go anywhere outside without his binoculars to look really, really carefully to see now what's that? Oh, it's some kind of warbler, he'd say. There's a lot of different warblers. Oh, that one's got a little yellow underneath its tail. That's a yellow-rumped warbler. Now, he knew that bird by its appearance, and he knew that bird by its song, and he knew dozens and dozens of birds. His sister loved flowers as much as he loved birds. And she carried a tiny little pocket hand lens with her wherever she went. And you'd often see her down on her hands or knees, looking really careful at a flower. Oh, look at that forget-me-not. I think it's a forget-me-not. Let me count how many petals. And she'd look down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals, a little. Yes, it's a forget-me-not. And she knew many, many wildflowers. And she kept a journal. She knew what time of year she could see the first trillium or the first forget-me-not. So one day they were out. It was a Saturday, no school that day. And they were doing what they loved best. They were taking a nature hike. They were on a path that was not a familiar path. It wasn't way out in the wilderness. And it wasn't too far from the town where they lived. And as they walked along, looking at the flowers and watching and listening for the songs of the birds, suddenly they heard, "Help me." Is that a bird? Help me. Doesn't sound like any bird. A little bit like a catbird. Help me, please, 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 help me. It was a teeny tiny voice. I guess I got teeny tiny in this story too. So it was a teeny tiny voice, and they followed in the direction that they thought the sound was coming from, and they looked up, they looked down, they looked around, but they couldn't see who or what was making this cry for help. But it was getting louder. Help me, please, please, help me, help me, help me. They knew they were going in the right direction, and they were able to follow signs. And sister, I think that sound is coming from that pine tree over there, that big white pine. They got closer, and the distress call was getting louder too. Help me, help me, help me. It was still a teeny tiny voice, but it was louder. And now they were sure that it was coming from the base of that pine tree, and they both got down on their hands and knees. They couldn't see anything, but they heard the voice. There was a pile of leaves there. They began to dig through the leaves, and there it was. They found it. Inside a little bottle, just about this tall, was a teensy tiny little man all scrunched up, with his face and nose pressed up against the bottle. And it was the teensy tiny little man who was calling, "Help me, help me, help me." Well, did I tell you? My brother and sister, if there are kids who love nature and birds and animals, they probably love people too, and they have good hearts. And here was a teensy tiny little man asking for help. And of course they were going to help. They saw that the bottle was closed up with an old dried up cork. Sister held the bottle really tight. And brother twisted the cork and twisted it and twisted it. He was able to get it out. And one tiny little hand, and then another hand came out over the edge of the bottle. And then they could see the teensy tiny little man's head come out in his trunk and his torso, and he jumped out of the bottle and took a deep breath. Fresh air. But before you could blink your eyes 3 times, that teensy tiny little man began to grow. He wasn't a teensy tiny little man anymore. I mean, in just those few seconds, he was as tall as brother and sister. And 10 seconds later, he was growing so fast, he was tall as the kids' parents. And he didn't stop there. He kept on growing and growing and growing until there before brother and sisters was an enormous giant. Now he stretched out and he sighed and moaned, and his voice was like a thunder. I've been in that bottle for 1,000 years, and now I could use myself something to eat. You two don't look like much, but you'll start. I'll start by eating you. Does that seem fair? Louis, does that seem fair? These kids let him out of the bottle, and now that giant wants to eat him. Is that fair? And that's just what brother and sister said. But that's not fair, they said. Let's all try that together. And almost like whining. That's not fair. We're kind-hearted and you were stuck in the bottle and we let you out because you needed help and now you want to eat us? That's not fair. But the giant crossed his arms over his chest, looked down at the kids and said, I don't care. Let's try that. I don't care. You kids need to learn the way of the world. You need to learn that sometimes you can be kind or do something good for someone else, but they might just not be kind to you. They will not pay you back with kindness. That's the way of the world, and that's the last thing that you're going to learn, because I'm going to eat you now. He picked up brother and sister, and there they were in his palm. He picked them up, and he opened up his mouth. But just before he could swallow brother, sister called out, wait. I think we should take this to a judge. I think a judge should decide whether it's fair and what you said is true about kindness and meanness. Let's take this case to a judge. Well, all right. We'll take the case to a judge if that's what you want, because I know I'm right and I know I'm going to get to eat you. Now, they weren't too far from a river. And brother said, let's ask the river to be a judge. Sister River flows from the mountains to the sea, through towns and villages. The river sees so many things. Let's ask the river if it's fair for you to eat us. The giant said, all right, we'll let the river judge the case. He still had brother and sister in his hands, and it was only a few giant steps over to the river. And he held the kids in his palm, and they told their story. River, river, and you know what the story is. We were walking along, minding our own business, enjoying nature. We heard someone calling for help, and we found a tiny little man in a bottle. And they told the whole story. And now he wants to eat us. And then they said, we can do this together. That's not fair. And the giant said, I don't care. Tell those kids that the way of the world is that sometimes when you do a kindness for someone else, they may not return that kindness. Tell the river that I'm right. The river thought, I am water. I give people water to drink. I give people water to cook, to wash themselves. I give people water to grow their plants. I give them life. But sometimes people are not so good to me. They leave their faucets running and let me just run down and waste me. They throw chemicals and oils and all kinds of poisons into my waters. They do not always appreciate me. Giant, I will take your side. I think you are right. You may eat the little children. And so the giant ate the little children. No, is that the way the story goes? Of course not. No, that would be too easy. The sister said, wait. That's, I want a second opinion. Let's go to another judge. A second opinion? Well, it's turning out to be an interesting day. Let's go get a second opinion. You'll find out the same thing. Good, said sister. Let's go walk up the valley where the winds blow, where brother wind blows. The wind blows from one end of the earth to the other. The wind picks up stories. The wind has heard everything that people do. The wind will know how to judge. And so now they took many more giant steps to get up to the head of the valley. The giant was still carrying brother and sister in his hands. Who told the story last time? I don't know if it was brother or sister. Well, the other one told the whole story this time to brother Wind. And we helped him, and we're kind-hearted, and he wants to eat us, and that's not fair. I don't care, said the giant. Tell the children the way of the world. Tell them how kindness is sometimes paid off with unkindness. And the air, the wind, thought, well, I'm kind to the people. I give them the very air that they breathe that makes life possible. I give them the air that allows them to speak. I give them the air that allows them to sing. And what do they do with this precious air that I give them? Sometimes they fill the air, they fill their world with harsh voices and say mean things. Sometimes they smoke cigarettes and fill me with dirt and filth. They send their smokestacks up. Oh yes, I'm very good to the people. They are not always so kind to me. And that's what Brother Wind said. Yes, you may eat the children. You are right. And so the giant ate the children. No, the giant didn't eat the children. They asked for one more judge, a third judge. And the giant said, all right, one more judge, and that's it. What this judge says will be the final word. And together, brother and sister said, let's ask the wisest judge of all. Let's ask Mother Earth herself. We're standing on her right here. Let's ask Mother Earth. Mother Earth knows everything. Mother Earth already knew the story, but Mother Earth listened as the children told the story for the third time. That's not fair. That's not fair, the children pleaded. Mother Earth spoke. Let me think. I give people the very earth that they walk from. Their bones are made for me. I give them their homes. I give them the wood, the trees, the earth for their gardens. I give them life. What is happening to me now? People are burning me up. They are burning me up. My body is hot. Yes, giant. I have been good to the people, but they have not returned my kindness. You may. No, wait, said Mother Earth. This is too important. I really have to think about this. Giant. There's one thing about this story that I don't understand. What's that? They say that you were in a little bottle? That's right. Is it? I don't understand how a big giant like you could be in a little bottle, said Mother Earth. Where is that bottle now? Sister said, we left it by a pine tree where we met the little man. Let's all go, said Mother Earth. I'll be there waiting for you when you get there. The giant walked back, the kid still in his hands, back to the place with a bottle. There was the bottle right by the roots of the pine tree. The giant put the kids down. No, giant, said Mother Earth. Could you show me how you get in and out of the bottle? Oh, that's easy. I've done that many times before for thousands and thousands of years. And now, before you could blink 3 times, the giant shrunk down to the size of the kids. And after you could sneeze once, he was a tiny, tiny little man. Well, show me how you were in the bottle, said Mother Earth. The giant, who was now a very little, tiny giant, throws himself back into the bottle. Mother Earth spoke. Children, I think you know what to do. There was the cork. Little sister held the bottle. Brother corked it up. And the little man was stuck tight in the bottle with his face scrunched up against the bottle glass. The kids dug that hole even deeper than it was when they found it. And as they began to pour dirt over the bottle, what do you think that little man was saying? It's not fair! It's not fair! And what do you think the kids were saying? We don't care. Not this time. And you know, that giant is still in that bottle. Do you know when he's going to get out next? Unmute yourself and tell me if you think you know how when that giant's going to get out of the bottle.
When the next group of children come along and dig him up.
Either when the next, but that could be a long time to wait. And you know, I feel like even though the giant got what he deserved, I think, I still feel a little bad for that giant. So I think there's still hope for that giant to get out of that bottle. You know when he's going to get out of the bottle? The next time a storyteller tells the story. He'll get out of that bottle for a little while. So I hope one of you, those of you I can see, or those of you who I can't see who are listening in, I hope you'll let that giant out of the bottle long enough to tell that story. So again, with great thanks to my friend Joe Hayes, who tried to imagine how that ancient story from India might play in modern times. So that's it, folks. Those are my stories today.
Thank you, Bob.
Really
Oh, wow, Bob. Thanks.
Bob Kanegis.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Bob,
That was Louis.
Oh, nice one, Louis. That's true appreciation.
So I want to share this with you, and because there are a few of you from over the pond, perhaps you can add your voices to this. It's there was a storyteller, a real traveling man, and his wife who spent a year here in and about Albuquerque, living out of a van and working on an archaeological site. And he was from Cornwall, and a marvelous storyteller. His name was George Bright, or still is. I've lost touch with him. But George would always finish his storytelling and say, "Let me tell you the storyteller's secret." He said, if you heard a story that you really, really like and you want to learn it, you must tell it the same day that you heard it, or at least before the sun comes up the next morning. And if you do, you'll remember it for the rest of your life.
True.
And it's been working for me. I just wonder if you've heard that before, if it's working for you.
I've
That
heard
works for
it,
me.
tried it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
I've heard
Oh,
that, Bob.
Joke.
And sometimes it's yes, I've heard it. But what I've learned is that the more you tell it, the better you become at it. And also, if you tell it well, you'll never tell it exactly the same way twice.
Yeah.
And then,
Well,
of
I
course,
just wanted to say about that story, I was really thinking that giant is going to be coming back pretty soon, unless those kids pass on the wisdom that they learned from the river and from the wind and spread the word and make some changes to the way. This is such a great environmental story. I'm going to be passing that one on myself, definitely.
It's not just the kid. It's not just the kids who have to learn that story. We have to, the elders, and parents have to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But the kids have
relearn
learned
it.
to see the wind and the river. Yeah. And Mother Earth. Wow, Mother Earth is very forgiving.
She is.
Hey guys.
Yeah.
Can I tell you what I discovered tonight? I was watching the show over on YouTube because I couldn't get in on my laptop on the phone. And the Bob Kanegis guy who's over on YouTube, he was brilliant. Now this Bob Kanegis, who's live here in the Zoom room on the website, he's rubbish. Next time, forget this guy. Go over to the Bob Kanegis on YouTube and watch it because he was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It's so good to hear your voice.
Thank you, Baden, for that. And thank you, Lucy, who probably just missed it all, unless she was watching on YouTube or Facebook.
You know what's happening right now is that, which is really interesting, is that our 20-year-old granddaughter is interviewing her right now via another Zoom call and learning a little bit about her life. So
fantastic.
That's
meanwhile, thank you, Ali, for actually being 10 people as usual, looking after the guests at the Riyadh, looking after this fantastic job. I've just left him. And he was being 10 people then as I left the Riyadh, and now he's probably being 20. So I had a fantastic time in Morocco. The cafe is coming on so well. We've been planning next year's festival, but what we got coming up, the important bit, is next Tuesday, which at 5 o'clock UK time will be our young storytellers. Be there, support them. Thank you. And meanwhile, one more round of applause for Bob Kanegis.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Ollie, for driving the bus.
Are other people having problems getting in because of that? Like Baden said, because I was finding it really hard to get in.
I had a hard time getting in myself.
And there's on my side, there is something that keeps.
There should be no problem getting in. It was it was Baden's technology. I've been keeping an eye on the admit button the whole time, and as soon as people are there, I'm admitting them.
There's a
Yeah, but you admitted Baden.
I'm not
there's a
getting.
scam
I'm not
going
even
on,
getting.
John. There's a kind of bug going on that needs to be
There is a
rectified.
yeah, but John, as I noted on Facebook, when I sign on to worldstorytellingcafe.com,
This is discussion. This is a discussion for the tellers.
Outside.
chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. But
Okay.
Bob,
Meanwhile,
Bob,
good night,
Bob
everybody.
in the Zoom room. Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. Way better than that guy on YouTube.
Okay. Right. See you, everybody.
take care, everybody.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Beautiful.
Bye.
Until the next
Love it.
time.
Yeah, hi, Baden.
Hey,
Bye,
King
Louis.
Louis. Hey, King
Bye.
Louis. Good to see you.
How
Thanks,
are
Bob.
you?
Cheers, everyone.
I'm good, man.
How
Not
are
as
you?
good as
I
you.
miss you.
I miss you too, man. I miss you too. You gotta put up with these others, Louis. I'll be back soon. Don't worry.
Don't threaten the boy.
Love you, little
And
brother.
when are you doing the reading of the books?
I'll let you know. Don't worry. You'll be there.
Okay.
Take
Take
care,
care,
man.
everybody.
Good to see you as always. Night all. Good to see you all. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
Ali.
Ali.
Oh, bye, Baden.
Beautiful. Bye, Louis. See you all
Bye.
soon. See you soon. Take care. Oh, bless.
Later,
Hey,
Brother
Brother
Baden.
C. How you doing, man?
I've done live performance last week, and I'm getting ready to do another one next Saturday.
Yeah, you said you were actually standing in front of people and nobody threw anything at you.
Only allocates and money.
Only accolades, money, and praise. That's
Right.
That's a result, man. That's a
And I
good
prefer it
result.
when they throw paper money because that hard money hurts. Hey, look, you and I need to let Ali sign us out. I will talk to
Yeah.
you soon. I want to interview you.
Oh, let me know when.
All right, I'm working it out.
Take
All right,
care. Night,
peace.
night, Ali. Yep. Bye, all.